It's an absolute privilege to be with you all tonight. I thought it would be good to start and kind of formally open this space. So let me formally open this space. E te reo Māori. Kia whakarongo aki au ki te tangi a te manu nei a te mā tuia. Tuia e runga, tuia e raro, tuia e waho, tuia e roto, tuia e te here tangata. Sorry, bro, it's a bit hard to translate. Ka rongo te pō, ka rongo te ao, tuia e te muka tangata e tākia mai, Hawaii ki nui, Hawaii ki roa, Hawaii ki pāma Māui, hono e te wairua, ki te whai ao, ki te ao marama, tihei, Mauri ora. I'm going to say tihei, you're all going to say Mauri ora, it makes it more fun, really. Tihei, Mauri ora, kia ora. What I basically just said was this. Listen to the birds because they are calling. They are weaving all things together. They're weaving from the top to the bottom, from the outside to in. They are weaving the very essence of us together. So listen to the darkness and listen to the light, because when we do that, our very essence is connected together, and then we can together follow the light towards wisdom and towards life. Yeah. Nō reira, nā mihi tuatahi ki te atua nui, he honore he kiroria ki te atua, no mai ki konei. So just shout out to God and acknowledging that. All honor in the midst of this goes to him. Nā mihi tuarua, second acknowledgement, ki ngā mate. Ki ngā tini mate o te wā. Haere atu rā. So the second acknowledgement I just want to make before we get into this is to those who have been with us and who aren't anymore. Which when we're doing a topic like this is poignant. It's those who have gone before us, enabling us to be here, and those who we have loved who are no longer with us. May they go to where they need to be. Nā mihi tua toru. Ki ngā mana whenua tua haukainga, tēnā koutou katoa. Nā mihi kia koutou. What's up to all of you? Hello. Ngā maunga whakahi o te motu. It's so great to have you here. So nau mai, haere mai, whakatau mai ki tēnei wā, ki tēnei wahi, ki tēnei kaupapa o hauora. Welcome. It's great to have you here at this place and at this time for this kaupapa, because it absolutely matters. It is such a privilege to be with you tonight, and we're going to talk about some really important stuff. So thank you so much for making it out on a Tuesday night to talk about a real feel-good topic. So my name is James. As you heard, I've worked for an organization called The Parenting Place for the last 12 years, and it has been amazing. The Parenting Place does all sorts of things. We do hot tips events. So next week there's a great event you could go along to, which is how to talk to your kids about porn, sex, and technology. Another really fun topic. We have toolbox programs. Put your hand up if you've ever been involved with the toolbox program. Lots of you, they're kind of like 6-week courses to give you a crash course on how to parent well at different ages and stages. We have family coaches who are great when you get a little bit stuck and you can't work out what to do. And then I've spent a chunk of my last 10 years working for Attitude and National Young Leaders Day. So Attitude is kind of the youth expression of all of our work. And it's great. I've got to travel all over the country. So check it out this year. I've been to Ashburton. Yeah, man, I've got to travel all over the place. It's been great. Essentially, Attitude does health education. So we do education around mental health stuff in high schools and intermediates, around technology. We even do a whole lot of health education around puberty, which is weird. Like, that wasn't what I thought my life would look like, when I was at school and the teachers were like, what do you want to be when you're older, man? I wasn't like, I want to be the puberty guy, To be honest, I didn't even know you could get a job as a health educator. Like, the only health educator I knew was a guy called Harold. And he wasn't even a guy. He was a giraffe. But I've kind of become kind of a slightly more grown-up version of Harold the giraffe, which is great. So that's how I've spent a lot of the last 10 years of my life, kind of helping young people to talk about this stuff. When I'm not doing that, I live here in Otautahi. I live with this girl. Mine. Yeah, just one. What did you say? Did you say my mum? How did you know? No. I live with my wife. Her name is Bex. My last name is Beck, so her name is Beck. And she is so lucky to have me. So I spend lots of time hanging out with her. When I'm not hanging out with her, I spend heaps of time with these other two girls who are my daughters. So I've got an 8-year-old. Her name's Eliza, and I've got a 4-year-old. Her name's Tilly. My 4-year-old is super cute. The other day I said to her, "What do you want to be when you grow up, Tilly?" And she goes, "I want to be a kitten." Obviously, we're not going to let her, but she's very, very cute. And then I've got an 8-year-old. She was born 10 days before the first earthquake we had here in Christchurch, the September one. So she was 10 days old. I was a brand new parent. And I will never forget that earthquake in the middle of the night. My whole house started shaking. I jumped out of bed. I started freaking out, and I did what any new parent would do. I jumped out of bed. I sprinted into my daughter's room, and I hid under her cot. So I was fine. She's crazy cheeky, though. I took her to this thing that I was speaking at recently, and if you're the person that speaks, when you show up, the people who are running the event, they're like extra nice to you, and often they try and be really nice to your kids. And so I'm there, I'm representing the parenting place, and the woman who was welcoming us, she goes, "Hello, and you're James, and hello, what are you called?" This is what my daughter says. She goes, "I'm called Eliza, but sometimes my dad calls me a dick." And I'm like, "Shut up, you dick." I work for the parenting place. Anyway, she's very, very cheeky. I like her a lot. So when I'm not traveling around speaking with people or learning about this sort of stuff or working with young people or hanging out in the networks that I hang out in, what is interesting about me? I play in a couple of bands. They both suck. And I love running. I love running up hills, down hills, away from the police, that sort of stuff. The main reason I love running is, out of all the things I've tried over the years, the only thing that actually helps me to genuinely and sustainably regulate my own mental health. I don't run because I enjoy it. I run because it's this thing I've found that helps me to deal with my own mental health or mental ill health. For my entire life, I've experienced anxiety and I've experienced depression. Not my entire life, but from a really young age, from around about 8 is when that first I started experiencing the symptoms of that. And to this day, I still manage my own mental health, and running is one of the ways that I do that. And so that's me. It's a privilege to be with you. I love getting opportunities to speak about this stuff, not because it's fun and not because it's easy, but because it's important and it matters. And because I was a messy young person myself, and I know what it's like to experience so much of the stuff that I'm going to speak to tonight. And I wish that the people that had been around me as I was wrestling with this had have known some of the stuff that we're going to talk about tonight. So I love these opportunities to get to speak, because I get to draw from my own lived experiences of dealing with mental health issues, and also from some of the things that I've learnt over the last decade as I've worked with young people and helped to support them through their own mental health issues. So welcome. If you're here, I'm so grateful. This is a confronting topic. This isn't everyone's ideal cup of tea for a Tuesday night. You know, you probably could have stayed home and watched The Block or something. I don't watch TV, obviously. So thank you so much for being here. Some of you are here because you care about this. Some of you are here because you have young people. Some of you are here because you care about young people. Some of you might just be here because you heard there'd be free cake. Whatever your reason is for being here, welcome. I also want to acknowledge that there's a big range of people in the room. There'll be some people here who have younger kids and you're just wanting to get a heads up as to what might be coming. There'll be some people here who don't have kids, but you work with young people. There'll be some people here who have experienced this stuff yourself, and you want to make sure that what I say is actually sane. Some of you might be here because you have teenagers and you're worried about them. Maybe you're here because of some of the conversations you've heard your young person having with their friends, or maybe the conversation you've had with your young person's friends. Maybe you're here because you are really worried. Some of you sitting here will not have experienced any of this yourself, any of this stuff that we're going to be talking about yourself, and you want to get your head around it. Some of you might have some experience. Maybe it's not your own, or you've lived with someone or been in relationship with someone who has experienced this stuff. And some of you sitting here, you might be concerned about this for young people, but then this is also something that's still going on for you to this day. No matter who you are or where you are at, welcome. Thank you for being here. This conversation really, really matters. And so tonight, this is called Mental Health, Self-Harm, and Suicidal Thoughts, but really we're talking about pain, yeah? Most of this boils down to pain. Not all of it, but most of it. And pain is actually something that most of us can get our head around. Who here, put your hand up if you've broken a bone at some point in your life. Cool, hands down. Put your hand up if you have had stitches because you had an accident. Okay, so most of us. Okay, put your hand up if you've ever stubbed your toe. Okay, I genuinely think that's one of the most painful experiences you can have, other than breaking your rib. I once broke my rib snowboarding, and that's one of the worst injuries, because if just breathing hurts for like 6 weeks, you're like, laughing's obviously really bad as well. The most painful experience I ever had physically happened when I was 8 years old. I was hanging out on this farm, and there was this tractor, and then there was me, and then there was this pile of bricks. And the tractor was a tractor, and I was like, and the bricks were like, because they're bricks. And the tractor went like this, it went smash. And what happened was I got most of my body out of the way, but this leg got trapped between the tractor and the bricks, and my foot compacted that way as much as it possibly could until it couldn't go that way any further, at which point my foot snapped. I broke both of the balls of my ankle in half. It was crap. I could do the helicopter with my foot. Like it was madness. The worst thing about that story was my dad was driving the tractor. He says he loves me. I don't believe him. That was incredibly painful. Second most painful thing that ever happened to me happened on the school camp when I was in like year 7. I was playing this game. I invented the game. I was playing it with the girls. The game was called If You Stop Running, I'm Gonna Kiss You. The girls didn't really want to play, but they were running, so technically they were playing. And there was this one girl that I was chasing, and she went around this corner really far. I'm not saying that's a good game, okay? I'm just saying that's the game that I made up, and I was a messed up young person. Anyway, she was running away from me, and she went around this corner really fast, and I wanted to keep up with her, so I grabbed onto this tree to swing myself around the corner really quickly. But what happened is I grabbed the tree, my hands slipped off, and my feet hit the ground, and they slipped out, and then I ended up kind of koalaing the tree, and then my face ended up running down the tree like this, which was fine, apart from a stick went in there, came out there, then ripped through my eyebrow, and then I just got stuck on the tree. Like, I just got stuck there with the stick in my lip. And the girl obviously wasn't that interested in helping me. She just ran off. And I'm like, help me, somebody. And I eventually had to break the stick off with it through my lip because I couldn't, get up. And then I went to my teacher, and I said what you say when you've got a stick in your lip, which is, I got a stick in my lip. And this is actually weird. He goes, I'll sort that. He went back to his bunk room and came back with a pair of pliers. I don't know why he had pliers. Like, that's weird, eh? When you're packing for a camp, you're like, sleeping bag, pillow, pliers. Like, I don't know what was going through his head. Anyway, he comes back. He puts the pliers on the stick. He puts his hand on my head, and he goes, okay, on 3. And I'm like, you're a teacher. I guess I'll trust you. Okay. And so he goes, 1, 2, 3, and tries to pull it out. It didn't come out. He tried another 3 times. Still didn't come out, and then they took me to the hospital, finally, and they cut the stick out, and then they gave it to me, like, here you go. I'm like, I don't want that. What am I going to do, pierce my ear or something? Anyway, The reason I'm telling you those stories is to get you to think about the times in your life that you've had stupid accidents, right? It happens to all of us. I don't know what you've experienced, but there are a few things that all of us, by the time we make it through adolescence, have worked out about physical pain. When it happens to us, we usually know why it happened, right? Unless you're a little bit drunk the night before and you wake up the next morning, you're like, where did that bruise come from? Anyone? Okay. We usually know why it happened. And because we know why it happened, we usually know how to avoid it happening again. Yeah? This is what we all learn about physical pain. And the other thing is this. We know that we don't really need to be embarrassed about it. When we're experiencing physical pain, we know where to go. You go to the doctor if it's a little bit bad. You go to the hospital if it's really bad, and you get your physical pain fixed. Sometimes they have to put your leg in a cast for 6 weeks. But the amazing thing about the human body is it normally heals itself back up, and then you're kind of good to go again. I mean, in my case, I'd still run a bit gammy, like my leg flicks out like this, but it still works. I can still run, right? We get physical pain. We struggle to get our head around emotional pain. We really do. We know that when we are experiencing physical pain, we know that we can go and get help and it will help. But when it comes to emotional pain, some of us are too embarrassed, or we don't think it will help, or we don't think that anyone could understand. That's true for adults. That's next level true for young people. And there are some big differences that are worth pointing out between physical pain and emotional pain. See, with emotional pain, we don't always know why we're experiencing it. Well, sometimes we do. Sometimes we lost our job, or we're going through a divorce or a separation, or there's been a breakup, or we've failed at something. Sometimes something happens, and so we know why. But often nothing's really happened. But we've got this emotional pain and we don't know what to do with it. And if you don't know how it's happening or why it's happening, then you don't know how to avoid it happening again, which can make it feel like you're just going to find yourself experiencing that again and again and again, that it was like that yesterday, it's like that today, and it will be like that tomorrow. And if you don't know kind of why it's happening, you don't know how to avoid it, a lot of people also don't know what to do with it, like how to deal with it, how to talk about it, how to cope with it. That is true for adults. It's especially true for young people. And it's especially true for young people because of the age and the stage that young people find themselves in. And so when I say the age and stage, I'm specifically talking about the massive transition that happens for young people between the ages of 11 and 18. So it is one of the most significant transitions that we go through in life. Obviously, like being born, massive transition. The first 3 years of life, the brain development, massive. But right up there is this time of transition from the age of 11 to the age of 18. There are so many things that change during that time. And one of the craziest things about being an adult is how quickly we forget how challenging that time was. So there are the physical changes, right? So obviously at age 11, most people still look like kids. And then by the age 18, they physically look like adults. Now, I've read some research that says that young people are going into puberty a little bit earlier than they used to, and there's probably some validity to that. I mean, I've worked in high schools for 10 years now, and I go into high schools now and look at the year 9s, and some of them are massive. Like, I'm looking at them thinking, what happened to you, man? You've got like a beard. You're 13. Like, seriously, did you go through puberty in the womb or something? Just like pop out like, sup, dad? Gonna go for a drive, can I have the keys? You know, young people do start to look older, younger, but they go through this massive transition from looking like a kid to looking like an adult. And if that was the only transition that they went through, that would be challenging. I don't know if you remember being insecure about if you had hairy armpits or not, or if your breasts had developed. I know that was a big one for me. Or if you were as developed as everyone else, or if you were too tall or too short, or whatever it is. Just that physical transition is a massive one. At the same time, there's another massive transition, which is your hormones go crazy. So guys get pumped with heaps of testosterone and they start smelling like Vikings. Girls get charged with like tons of estrogen and they also start smelling like Vikings. Only slightly nicer Vikings. Guys go through this hormonal change, and it actually changes the way they talk. They go from saying heaps of words to just grunting a lot. That is a massive change. Then they go through this like identity change, this social change, where they go from finding their main sense of value and identity from being part of their family to being part of the friendship group to actually becoming their own person. That's a massive process with a whole set of challenges that goes along with it. The name for that process is individuation, and it's difficult to navigate for the young person and for the parents. Because young people find themselves saying like, listen, mum, you're not the boss of me, okay? I can look after myself. And then 5 minutes later, they're like, what's for dinner? You know, it's this tricky time. And then on top of all of that, there's all the brain development stuff that's going on. Brains are crazy. Put your hands together like that. That's how big your brain is. So if you've got small hands, shame. Your brain grows from the bottom up, from the inside out, and from the back to the front, okay? Now, sort of 20 years ago when they started doing a whole lot of research into brains, they reckon that the adult brain was fully developed around 20. And as the research has gone on and on, they reckon now it's sort of as late as 25, 30, mostly for guys. So the brain fully finished is developing for women around about the early 20s. For men, it's as late as 30. And the last part of the brain to develop is this bit, the prefrontal cortex, which does things like risk assessment, memory, impulse control. Some of you might be in relationship with men in their 40s going, it's still not developed. Now, here's the thing about this part of the brain, right? As soon as it reaches its like fulfillment, as soon as it is actually fully developed, one of the craziest tricks that our brain plays on us is we totally forget what it was like to not have a fully functioning developed brain. We almost instantly forget. And so to create even the mildest sense of empathy for young people, I want you to think about a time in your life when you were about to do something stupid, but your prefrontal cortex didn't work just yet, so you found risk assessment really hard. And so you scanned around in your head thinking to yourself, what is the worst thing that could happen if I did this? And you came up with nothing. Probably how some of you got married, right? It's amazing that this part of our brain takes so long to develop. I remember I was about 23 and I was hanging out with a friend and we went up to the Port Hills to skate down some of the roads. New subdivision, Kennedy's Bush. It was smooth roads. It was great. There was this run where you could go down like this, and then it had a kink at the end, and so you'd go up a little bit, and then you could jump off your board and run back up the hill. So we did that run a few times, and then I get to the top, and there was this intersection where you started, and there was this way steeper hill, and I looked at him, and I was like, dude, has anyone done that run before? And he goes, nah. And I go, should I do it? And he goes, yeah. I was like, right? So I just start skating off. And as soon as I get like 20 meters into this run, I know I'm going way too fast to stop. And so I start freaking out. I don't know what to do. I didn't think it through. I didn't do the risk assessment. And so I start thinking, what am I going to do? And my brain presents me with this option. My brain's like, dude, why don't you just jump in the air and start running really fast? Like I literally thought that was going to help. So I jump in the air, I run real fast. It's really hard to jump in the air and run real fast. And so I hit the ground, I roll down the hill, my shoes fly off, my jeans get all ripped up, there's blood everywhere. I finish rolling down the hill right in front of this house that's getting built. And this builder walks up to me, he's this old dude, and he goes, you're bloody stupid. If you're gonna do stupid stuff like that, you need a helmet, you need knee pads, you need arm pads, you need wrist pads. He's just like giving me a lecture. And then his apprentice, this younger guy, he walks up to me and he goes, oi, aren't you that guy that goes around schools telling people to make good choices? We totally forget what it's like to not have a fully developed frontal lobe. One of the things that our frontal lobe does is helps us with impulse control, helps us with risk assessment, helps us to think about the consequences of our actions, yeah? It doesn't fully kick in for girls, for women until their early 20s, for men until their mid to late 20s. There's one thing going on in the teenage years. Another thing is this. There's this part of your brain called the amygdala, which does emotional regulation, right? Is one of the things that it does. And somewhere between the age of 14 and 16, for around about a year, this part of your brain just goes on holiday. Like it actually takes off and goes, I'm out. It like mic drops and it just takes a break. And there's a reason for it. While the amygdala is turned off, the brain goes through this pruning process so that you can go from concrete thinking, which is where 11-year-olds are at, where they see the world as black and white, right and wrong, to abstract thinking, where you can see all the gray and all the nuances of everything. But during that period of time, every single emotion that you experience is turned up to 11. Every single emotion that you experience is just unlike anything you've ever experienced before. Now, that is true for all of the nice experiences. That is true for love. It's true for when you're crushing on someone hard out as a 15-year-old and you look at them and you're like, oh, I want to have your babies, right? It's also true for all of the negative emotions. And one thing that we know about humans is in terms of base emotions that we make, we have more negative emotions than we do positive emotions. And so during this time, from somewhere between 14 to 16, a lot of young people end up experiencing at full volume the most painful experiences, the most painful emotions, the most full-on emotional pain that our brains and our bodies can muster. And then on top of that, not only do they go through the physical change, the social change, the emotional change, the brain development change, they go from year 7 to year 13. They go from getting their pen license and spending 2 hours working on a title page to calculus in 7 years. The amount of transition, the amount of pressure, the amount of brain development going on for young people, it's crazy. And in amongst that, the experiences that young people have turned up to full noise because of the brain development are incredibly painful. And once your brain is fully functioning and once you've come out of that period of time, unless you spend a lot of time working with young people, you forget. And you actually find it really difficult to empathize with young people who are going through that. That's why I've spent so much time painting a picture of what this time is like in a young person's life. One of the biggest transitions that happens during that time is realizing how incredibly painful life can be. How emotionally painful life can be. Many young people experience heartbreak for the first time, or bullying, or failure, or shame, or guilt, or loneliness, and those experiences are unpleasant. They're actually horrible. It can be a breakup, it can be a friend moving away, it can be a failed test, being kicked out of a group chat. It can be rumors being spread about them, stress at home, money troubles at home, feeling like they are different or ugly or not good enough, or like no one likes them, or they feel stupid, or they experience something traumatic, which happens to a really high number of young people, or they experience way too much stress or pressure than their brain can handle, or they feel like people would be happier when they're not around. I mean, that's a short list. That list could go on and on and on, and I don't know what your experience of being a teenager was like, but I'd love you to remember. And I'd love you to connect with the things that were challenging and reflect on it, because the biggest difference between young people and adults is this. As an adult, you can look back on those painful emotions that you experienced throughout your teenage years, and you can look back on them and know that they didn't last forever. You can look back on them with perspective. Whereas when you're a young person and you're right in the middle of all of the challenges, all of the transitions, and the emotional pain that's generated by so many of the things that happened during that time, it can feel emotionally horrible. And it can feel like it was like that yesterday, like it's like that today, and like it's going to be like that tomorrow. It can feel like there's no way you could ever live without that sort of emotional pain. Another big difference is this. As you go through life and as you become an adult, you develop a tolerance to emotional pain. Yeah? Like you're sad when your cat dies, but then you're kind of like, well, it was just a cat. I like dogs. Anyway, what then happens is as you develop a tolerance to pain, as you go through painful emotions, is you develop a tolerance of what should upset you, what you think should upset someone and shouldn't upset someone. Now, this is less true for really empathetic people because you can feel as someone else could feel, but a lot of adults, or a lot of men as well, just get a little bit hardened to other people's emotional experiences, especially other people's emotional pain. One thing that I'd love you to think about is that pain is subjective. One thing that we often do to young people without meaning to is tell them that what they're experiencing isn't that bad, that it was worse when we were kids, and so you shouldn't really be feeling the way that you're feeling. But pain is subjective. If a young person is experiencing full-on emotional pain, no matter what the cause of it is, even if it's just their rabbit dying, which for me is not a big deal because rabbits, but for them, massive deal for so many people. Understanding the pain as perspective thing is really, really important. They don't have the same perspective as adults, and you can't just give them your perspective unless you first give them your full attention and your empathy. Yeah? So, where are we at? Being a young person is hard. It is hard. It was hard for you, probably, and if it wasn't, maybe you're really, really positive, and that's cool. There are heaps of changes that young people are going through. During the teenage years, young people have to learn to cope with all these new emotional experiences. We have more negative emotions than positive emotions, and negative emotions are really unpleasant to feel. And so, a lot of young people actually do all right. That's the good news. They actually learn how to deal with emotional pain really, really well. They learn how to cope with it. If you are a parent or a youth worker or a teacher, you can actually model really healthy ways of coping with emotional pain. But lots of young people don't have that modeled to them. They don't really know what to do when they find themselves experiencing that stuff. But all of us develop ways of coping with emotional pain when we experience it. All of us. And that's what I want to do for the next chunk of this talk, is talk about some of the ways that people learn or develop or come up with to cope with emotional pain. The first one I want to look at is self-harm, for a couple of reasons. One, it was in the title of the talk. And two, because post-earthquake and having worked with young people for a decade now, anecdotally, this seems to be more and more common. There are definitely a lot of young people affected by self-harm. So if you're sitting here and you're like, what's self-harm? Self-harm is a young person harming themselves. And it's usually, but not exclusively, a young person cutting themselves. Now, the most common question that I get asked by parents, teachers, youth workers when I find myself talking about this stuff, especially young people who haven't experienced what it would be like to do this or what it would be like to think about this, the main question that I get asked is, any guesses? It's why. Yeah. Why would you do this? And the simple answer is this, is because it helps young people to cope with emotional pain. If you can't understand that, if you can't empathize with it, that's okay. But I hope while I'm talking about this, you can develop some empathy for what it would be like to learn this as a way to cope. If young people are experiencing emotional pain, they will look for ways to cope with pain, and self-harm has become a reasonably common way that some young people attempt to cope with emotional pain. Now, we all have coping strategies. I don't know what yours are. Some of them are things like eating chocolate. You might eat more chocolate when you're stressed or overwhelmed or when you're hungry or when you're buying chocolate. You might drink red wine or drink whatever you drink. We drink a lot to cope in Aotearoa. You might eat ice cream. You might run. You might surf. You might spend ages binge watching a Netflix show. I don't know what your thing is, but all of us have ways that we cope with unpleasant emotions, and they're on a scale, like everything, from healthy down one end to like not that healthy down the other. Self-harm is down the really not that healthy end of the coping spectrum, but people do it because it helps them to cope. So why do people start? Is the next question that I normally get asked. So there's a certain level of social contagion, which is what like academic people say is just, it's kind of like, sometimes it's peer pressure or sometimes it's contagious. But most young people aren't born with the idea of self-harm as a coping strategy in their head. It's not like babies pop out and they're like, I'm a bit sad, maybe I should cut myself, right? That's not how it works. That was a really weird joke. That was super dark. I've been thinking about this all day. Anyway, let me move on. Most people don't have this in their head. This is kind of counter what our brain's designed to do. Our brain's designed to kind of protect us. So where does this idea come from? Usually, most people that find themselves self-harming are in relationship or friendship with someone who has done it before. And so they develop it as an idea, and it doesn't mean that necessarily when young people do it for the first time that they really want to, or that they think it's a good idea, or they're in emotional distress, or they're going through emotional pain, or they're going through emotional dysregulation. Sometimes for young people, it's literally, all my friends are doing it. That's sometimes where it starts. But then what happens at some point is that same young person will fail a test, or will have a friend say something really nasty to them, or not get invited to something, or have a massive argument with their parent, or have a whatever. And they go, I've done that before. I didn't really like it, but apparently it kind of helps, and try it. And what happens when people self-harm is their brain releases a cocktail of chemicals, mainly adrenaline, and for a short period of time, it feels better. People do it because it actually helps them to cope. Now, in terms of risk factors, this is more common in females. It's more common between 15 and 19. It's more likely if they know someone who has done it before, and they're more likely to do it if they're affected by anxiety or obsessive compulsive disorder, or eating disorders or disordered eating. But young people do this because they learn after a while. It's not often the first time. It's not always the first time, but they learn after a couple of times that this is a guaranteed way to make the pain go away for a bit. I hope I'm not normalizing this. It's not what I'm trying to do. On the spectrum, it's down the unhealthy end of coping strategies, and there are definitely better strategies out there, but I want us to have some empathy of how a young person could land there. A few thoughts. Most parents, or most people who genuinely care about young people, when they find out that this is going on for them, their reaction is normally something like disappointment or anger, or sometimes frustration. And I can totally understand that, especially if you're a parent. I mean, as a parent, your desire is to try and protect your kid, and if they're hurting themselves, you're like, what can I do? I get why that might be your reaction, but sometimes anger or disappointment can actually cause more emotional pain for a young person, and the only strategy that they have to deal with emotional pain is self-harm. Yeah? Do you get how this can be a really tricky cycle? Now, I know that if you find out your young person's been self-harming, you're going to be flooded, and it's your kid or someone that you really care about. You'll probably be flooded with your own emotions. And that's really understandable, but you need to understand that self-harm is a learnt coping strategy, and that coping strategies, you can't just take a coping strategy off someone and leave them with nothing. That's not how coping strategy works. If someone took your chocolate away, you'd be a psycho, right? You start chasing people and stealing their chocolate. Same with self-harm. You can't just take this away from them and go, no, don't do it. What most experts would suggest is that you replace that coping mechanism with a different coping mechanism that causes less harm. Yeah? A great substitute here is holding ice. It still hurts, it's still painful, but the ice eventually melts. Now, counseling can help with self-harm, especially CBT or DBT. That's what the CDHB, is that enough acronyms for you? That's what they recommend. And it can help, and I'll give you a whole lot of websites and numbers at the end of this talk. But I want you to understand, and this is really important for where we're going with this talk, that self-harm is normally a learned coping strategy, and young people do it because it helps. Some people get really freaked out by self-harm specifically because they feel like self-harm, the cutting, is like the precursor to suicide. That's how some people react to it. Let me give you a kind of related analogy to try and help with that. Lots of people smoke cigarettes, and some people that smoke cigarettes go on to smoke pee. But not everyone who smokes cigarettes goes on to smoke pee. Yeah? It's the same with self-harm. Some people that self-harm go on to attempt or complete suicide. Yes, that's true. But not everyone that self-harms goes on to attempt or complete suicide. Yeah. I guess what I'm trying to do in talking about self-harm and in talking about the next thing that we're going to talk about, which is anxiety, is yes, acknowledge that they are things and acknowledge what's kind of going on for them, but also point to the larger thing going on behind them, which is self-harm is an attempt to cope with emotional pain. And so if a young person is self-harming, yes, you could make self-harm the main thing and have a big conversation about that, but it's actually an invitation to talk about the other thing that's going on, which is where the emotional pain is going on in their life and what you can do to support them with that. The same thing is true for anxiety. So in some ways, self-harm is a way to try and control pain. Anxiety, in a really simple way, I mean, it's a really complex topic, but in a really simple way, it is someone trying to come up with ways to avoid pain in the future. This is what kind of like anxiety at a real brain level does. What happens is you find yourself imagining the worst possible things that could happen tomorrow, thinking about how awful it would be if they happened, and then try and make plans to avoid that stuff that might happen tomorrow. Who here has experienced anxiety? Albeit a lot of people. Yeah, awesome, sweet. Well, not awesome. It sucks. I've lived with it my entire life. The biggest problem with anxiety is it doesn't actually help you to avoid those horrible situations. What ends up happening instead is you experience in the present moment exactly what those feelings would feel like, but you're not experiencing them when they happen, you're experiencing them right now. You imagine the worst thing that could happen tomorrow and you start to physically react as if that thing is happening. Your brain's attempt to help you to avoid pain actually pulls that imagined pain into a physical experience right now in the present. That's why anxiety is so crippling. And it's really hard to rationalize with your own brain. It's really hard when you start to have the physical reaction that goes along with anxiety to talk back to your brain and say, no, that's not happening. If you've experienced anxiety, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And so, in an attempt to avoid unpleasant, painful emotions in the future, we end up experiencing them right now, and sometimes even worse than we would if we were to actually put ourselves in that situation, because anxiety never gives you the benefit of the doubt. Anxiety never imagines, what if it went well? It just never does that. Now we've landed this in the world that young people are living in, and all of the things that they have to worry about in their body, in their hormones, in their relationships, in their brain, in their school. There's so much pressure. No wonder anxiety is such a massive thing. Oh, did I mention this entire generation of young people went through really traumatic events and earthquakes, if you were living around here? Crazy. Here's what anxiety fails to take into account. 1, it overestimates how painful the imagined experience would be. Always. Your brain always creates the worst possible thing that could happen, and it hardly ever happens. In fact, in my experience, never. I have never come close to experiencing anything close to the worst thing that my brain has imagined. I don't know what your anxiety has been like, but that's been my experience. Anyone else? Cool. Maybe I've just had a lovely life. Second thing is that it overestimates how bad things will be, but it also underestimates your actual ability to cope with that thing if it did happen. Is that tracking for everyone? It's like, it's gonna be really bad and I wouldn't be able to cope. And the truth is that it probably won't be that bad and you've actually got way more ability to cope than you know. But the problem is that if you're in the middle of that anxiety emotion, what happens is your body starts reacting. And when your body's reacting to anxiety, your body's actually flooded with the stress hormones that cause you to go into a fight or flight response. Which is why it's so funny it's not funny. Well, it is, if you get really anxious in an exam. Because what happens is your body goes, you're under threat, your life's under threat, and so it pumps all the blood away from your brain to your arms and legs, so you're ready to run away from a lion. But what you need to do is have all the blood circling around in your brain so you can concentrate on calculus. It's this really ironic miss of biology. What I've noticed about my own anxiety is that my ability to talk back to it and pull myself out of it rationally is almost non-existent. My ability, or what I've learned over the years, is my ability to regulate my breathing and regulate my body to get my head back to a calm state is actually quite high. 9 times out of 10, I'm actually able to do that. And so if you have a young person who is really anxious, trying to tell them that the school bus isn't going to crash, it's really unlikely. Or trying to tell them that there's probably not going to be an earthquake, or trying to tell them that they're not going to get teased at school. Trying to rationalize with them almost never works. What does work is teaching them strategies that can. And that's almost always some form of breathing activity to learn how to regulate the body, which can bring your brain back down. Now, there are tons of apps and YouTube videos and websites dedicated to this. If you have an anxious young person, one of the best things that you can do is actually when they get there or when they're heading there, sit with them and do the activity with them. Actually teach that as a way to regulate their body. And if you engage with it with them, they're way more likely to do it, and it will actually help them to be more likely to do that in the future as well. Anxiety is complicated, but in its simplest explanation, it is the brain trying to avoid unpleasant pain in the future. So we've got self-harm, which is a way to try and control emotional pain. You've got anxiety, which is a way to try and avoid pain. The last thing that I want to briefly touch on are addictions. And an addiction, in its simplest sense, is when people try to escape pain. Now, this is a massive generalization, so take this with a grain of salt, but girls, generally speaking, are more likely to head towards self-harm in terms of to try and control pain. Boys are more likely to head towards addiction to try and escape pain. And there are lots of addictions. An addiction is essentially your brain saying to you, do that thing again, it will make you feel better, even if you know that it really won't, or even if you know that it only lasts for a short period of time. But if you've got a whole lot of really unpleasant, painful emotions going on in your world because of what's going on around you, man, the idea of escaping it for a little bit is really, really enticing. Let's also remember that young people are going through a stage in brain development where they really struggle to do impulse control well. And so if their brain goes, hey, do this thing, it'll make you feel better. And they're like, nah, it won't. And their brain's like, yes, it will. And they're like, okay. It's really hard to talk back to. No wonder gaming and technology have such a powerful effect on young people. I mean, gaming's so stimulating. It's so fun when you win. The rewards are amazing. The games are designed by people that help people to stay in casinos. It's not made up, it's true. No wonder social media is so addictive. We all love to be liked. There's nothing more amazing than putting up an image and having someone like it. It literally shoots you with a bit of dopamine and you're like, I want that again. And so people do more and more stuff to get more and more likes. Now, the most common addictions affecting young people, some of them are different to when we were young people. Some of them are exactly the same. Things like technology, obviously, drinking, smoking, those are still common ways of escaping. Porn is really new. I mean, porn's been around for a long time, but porn is a widespread addiction. Massive. They reckon that 100% of 14-year-olds have been exposed to porn. And the latest studies coming out of New Zealand that say by the age of 16, about 30% of teenage boys viewing porn on a daily or weekly basis. So it's massive. And in terms of escape, it's perfect. Not saying it's good. I don't think it is. Social media, obviously, gaming, drugs. Now, again, like anxiety, like self-harm, if you find out that your young person is like compulsively using porn or doing drugs, you're probably not going to be that stoked. If there's a young person that you're in a relationship with, you're not going to be like, oh, well, that's fine, keep doing it. But often the reason that young people keep doing this stuff or start doing this stuff in the first place is because it kind of makes them feel better. And I guess the thing I'd love you to take away from this section, and we're going to have a break after this and then get into the last section of this talk. Self-harm, anxiety, addictions, they're not always, but they are often not the actual problem. They are symptoms of the problem. And a lot of parents especially rush in when they find that stuff going and treat it like it's the main problem and make it the big thing. But they are symptoms of the big thing that's going on, and the big thing that's going on is that young person is almost always experiencing some sort of overwhelming, unpleasant, painful emotion. So symptoms like self-harm, like addiction, like anxiety, are actually an opportunity to start a way more important conversation about what's causing that emotional pain in that young person's life. And if you listen well, and if you manage to keep your reactions calm, you are actually likely to find out what's really going on, and then you can actually help young person to find the help that they need for what's really going on. So we're going to give you these at the end, and I'll give you some other information at the end as well. But if you're sitting here going, oh man, this stuff's really full on, and I already don't really know what to do, make sure you grab one of these on the way out. These are a whole lot of different people and resources that you can get in touch with to kind of discuss this stuff, or to seek help, or to find support for you or for anyone that you know that's experiencing this stuff. All right. To finish this talk, because the topic of it was mental health, self-harm, and suicidal thoughts, you cannot talk about this topic without talking about depression. There are so many challenges that we face as parents. Put your hand up if you're a parent in this room. Yeah, cool, most of you. There's the never-ending laundry pile. That's a massive challenge. The rapidly evolving teenage lexicon is hard to keep up with. That thing that goes on for you, when you're wondering how many years you can keep wearing maternity pants after you actually gave birth. Just me? All right. However, almost nothing can prepare you for the common experience, and I say common experience, of your child being affected by depression. Nothing can protect you for that. We have this instinct as parents to try and protect our kids. Nothing can prepare you for the feelings and the emotions and the challenges that you'll find yourself going through if your young person is affected by depression. I mean, we have this powerful desire to protect our children. I don't know what it looks like for you. Maybe you want your kids to wear like a helmet when they're coloring in pictures or something, but when we notice that our kids are struggling with depression, it can actually, one of the big challenges as a parent is it can actually contribute to your own sense of failure. Like, what did I do wrong? Have I not done enough? Have I not offered enough love? But before you kind of spiral down that rabbit hole, and I'm familiar with it, not because I've been there yet, my girls are still pretty young, but because I watched my mum spiral through all those emotions when I was right in the midst of struggling with depression. Before you let yourself go there, let's just remember that this is it's actually quite a common experience. According to the Mental Health Foundation, as of 2017, they reckon that 11.8% of 15 to 24-year-olds have a high or very high probability of experiencing some kind of anxiety or depressive disorder. According to the Lowdown, it's 1 in 4 girls between the age of 12 and 24 experience some type of depression. That's 25% of girls throughout that period of time. And apparently it's 1 in 6 guys go through some form of depression between the age of 12 and 24. Interestingly, out of the girls that experience depression, the majority of them tell someone they talk to someone. It's not always a counselor or a parent, but they will put into words the fact that that's something they're experiencing. 1 out of 10 guys, 1 out of the 10 guys who experience mental health will actually tell someone. There's a lot of stigma in our country about men admitting that they're struggling with unpleasant emotions, mostly because there's a lot of stigma in our country with men having emotions, full stop. But that's a different conversation. So before we kind of jump into depression and talk about it like it's all really intense and young people are incredibly, they're contemplating suicide. Before we jump in there, let me just say that depression happens on a spectrum and we're all on it, right? So down this end of the spectrum is bad moods. You all get these sometimes. You wake up in the morning and for no really good reason, you're just annoyed. Or maybe sometimes there is a reason, like you were lying in bed and you rolled out of bed and you were actually way closer to the side of the bed than you thought. So you like roll over and you bang your head on the bedside cabinet. And so you wake up and you're just in a bad mood. You walk around, you see cabinets, you're pissed off. You're like, stupid cabinet, I'm watching you. There's bad moods. They come, they go. We all know what that's like. Then there's a little bit further up the scale, there's mild depression, which a lot of people in Christchurch experience through the winter. I don't know if you're like this. If you get to August and you're just sick of not seeing the sun. If you get to August and you're just sick of the cold and you're sick of the wind and you're sick of the grey and you don't really have that much energy, you feel a bit flat, you just feel a bit tired, you're not really excited about anything. Who knows exactly what I'm talking about here? Yeah. So that's quite common. The thing is, it doesn't stick around for that long. It doesn't stick around for that long because then it gets a little bit warmer and it gets a little bit sunnier and all of a sudden you're like, stuff's all right. I realized I'd been feeling a little bit flat the other day. I walked through Hagley Park on my way to work and I was walking through Hagley Park and I had this experience. This is what happened. I went, yeah! I saw a daffodil. That's legitimately what happened. But what it signaled to me is like, hey, spring's nearly here. Yeah? So I don't know what that is, but we all experience that. So we've got bad moods down here, mild depression. Then there's situational depression. So it's a sadness, it's a heaviness, and it's usually connected to a situation, to a significant loss or to significant change. It's someone getting sick, it's someone moving away, it's someone passing away, it's relationship breakup. It's when you had something and you don't anymore, and it's painful, and if you're in that at the moment, it's hard. Most people go through that and come out of that as well. You don't really need anyone to kind of counsel you through it. Some people do, and that's totally fine. People get stuck in situational depression, in grief and loss, when they place more value on what they had than what they still have, and they find themselves with a sense of hopelessness or sadness because they feel like tomorrow could never, ever be as good as yesterday. And I get that. I've experienced some significant loss in my life. And sometimes what you need is someone who's been through something similar to reach back and to grab you and to help pull you into the future so you can remember the good things about life. So sometimes you need someone who's trained to help you do that. So there's the spectrum, bad moods, mild depression, situational depression, and then there's clinical depression or diagnosed depression or unipolar depression or bipolar depression or whatever language you want to use, depending on what your background is. There's depression that affects you in a really, really significant way. And I guess probably the most helpful thing to do is to talk through like what the most common symptoms of kind of diagnosed clinical depression, what they look like. So it looks like always sleeping or never sleeping, always hungry or never hungry, or always eating or never eating, finding yourself or finding young people crying often or crying over stuff that they wouldn't normally cry over, or getting really upset compared to the actual situation, pushing people away especially friends or people that they used to really love, they're kind of holding them at arm's length. Giving up on things, especially things that they really enjoyed, like sports or dance or whatever it is, and thinking about death. Now, the interesting thing about that list is the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things on that list are also reasonably normal behaviors for every adolescent. And that's why mental health within young people can be hard to spot, with the exception of never eating. That's not a normal experience for the majority of young people. Normally they are down the end of always eating. It's that bottom one that really makes the difference. It's the bottom one of thinking about death or thinking about dying. To be diagnosed with depression, you need to have at least 3 of those things happening regularly or constantly over a 2-week period. And that means that you don't actually have to have the bottom one. You can have 3 of those top 5. But most people who find themselves wrestling with depression, and this is especially true for young people, at some point will find themselves thinking about death. And there's a reason for that. And the reason is, if you're experiencing depression, you are experiencing emotional pain at its most full on. And at the same time, you feel in some ways the most powerless to do anything about it. It's this horrible feeling that you feel like you can't stop and you can't escape. No wonder some people end up thinking, man, it would just be easier if I wasn't alive, because then I wouldn't have to deal with this pain. So, and this is an obvious question, if you notice these symptoms, and as a parent, you're probably the person that's actually the most in tune with where a young person's at, although if you've got a relationship in a young person's life, you can pick up on this stuff. If you notice this stuff, what do you do? Like, do you go, hey, I've noticed you've gone from having 4 Weet-Bix to 2 Weet-Bix. Are you sad? Right? That's what do you do? The very first thing, and this is so important, is actually check your own emotional state. Like, think about how you are feeling about how the young person that you care about is feeling. Because if you're feeling like you've somehow failed, or you're feeling angry, or you're frustrated, or you're sad, or you're disappointed, and you drag with you those emotions into trying to have a conversation with the young person, you are totally going to miss each other. It's important to check in with yourself, because if your young person is experiencing depression, they are experiencing emotional turmoil, or as fancy people who have letters after their name call it, they're experiencing emotional dysregulation. And if you have any chance of getting through to them, you need to be calm, or as fancy people put it, you need to be emotionally regulated. Are you all tracking with this? This is actually really, really important, and this is a common miss. As you notice this stuff and you hit your young person up about it, and the reaction for a lot of parents, because they're so invested into this young person's life, is kind of anger or frustration or disappointment. Now, I totally get why you'd feel that way, but there is a different time and place to process those emotions. I'm going to try and land this with a story. It's a really personal story, but I think it makes this point really well. I was a really messy teenager for a long, long time. I started developing all of these symptoms of depression around about 14. And it was 2.5 years before I got any help for it. And there were a few reasons for that. One of the reasons is I got really into drugs, and drugs became, in my family, the issue that my parents were trying to deal with. They were like, we don't want you to do drugs. They got a drug and alcohol counselor involved. I was like, clearly you can't see that I'm hurting. Obviously, that's not how I was thinking at the time. At the time, I was like, you hate me. Drugs are mean. But looking back on it, I was like, clearly you don't understand what's going on here. You're totally missing me. They'd make this big deal out of that. And for me, that was actually this cry for help. It was when I was 16 and a half that I'd been caught doing drugs again, because I was really, really sad. I was hurting really badly, and that helped the pain to go away for a bit. And my mum came into my room, and she spent what felt like hours just yelling at me. And she was angry, and she was frustrated, and she was disappointed, and she's like, "You're bloody stupid, you're throwing your life away," all the things that parents say when they're hurt themselves. And she wore herself out, which was awesome. It was actually the best thing that could have happened. She wore herself out to the point where she sat on the edge of my bed and said nothing for about 5 minutes. And in that moment, in that 5 minutes, she was able to regulate herself enough to the point where she was able to say this. She said, "James, what's really going on?" And she said it calmly, and she said it empathetically enough that it got through. But I'd been hiding what was going on in my life for a long, long time, so I was like, nothing. She goes, "No, James, seriously, I care about you. I want to help you. What's really going on?" And she asked that same question again and again, and each time with more empathy and with more reassurance, like, "We care about you, we're going to get you the help you need, just tell me what's really going on." And after a while, I started saying, "I can't tell you, Mum." And she would say, "You have to tell me because I have to get you help. What's really going on?" And after sitting with me in that space and me knowing that she was going to help me to find the help that I really needed, I was for the first time in my life able to say, "Mum, there's been sexual abuse going on for a long, long time." It was the first time it was able to spill out of my mouth, and it's because my mum was calm enough for me to actually engage with the conversation. And then she was able to help me get the help that I needed. She helped get me into counseling, and that was incredibly, incredibly helpful for me. Now, there is so much that I could say in this space, and youth workers and counselors and psychologists and psychiatrists, they get a whole lot of really specific training on how to have these conversations with young people when you can see all this stuff is going on and you know that they're not in a good space. But I'm not going to go into that with you. I'm not going to, especially because there are a lot of parents sitting in this room, talk to you about how counselors and psychologists and psychiatrists and youth workers go about this conversation. For one reason, your role, if you're a parent sitting in this room, is not to be a youth worker, a counselor, a psychologist, or a psychiatrist. Your role, if you're a parent sitting in this room with a young person going through this stuff, is to be a parent. Your job isn't actually to be trained and equipped with the skills you need to assess how much risk there is that a young person is going to act on some of these thoughts. And there are a few reasons for that, because one, the worst case scenario is that you do that and you get it wrong. And you go, "Nah, there's not much risk," and it turned out there actually was. And the second reason is because your main job as a parent is actually to love your young person and to reassure them and to help them find help, not to be the help yourself. But that there is one question that every parent, that every adult actually needs to learn how to be confident enough to ask whenever they see a young person displaying these symptoms. There's actually two questions. The first one is this: "Hey, I've noticed stuff's not great for you. Have you thought about death, or have you thought about killing yourself, or have you thought about suicide?" Now, a whole lot of people hear that question and think to themselves, "Oh my goodness, if I said that, wouldn't I be putting the idea into their head?" And there is a whole lot of research that says that is absolutely not the case. First question, have you thought about killing yourself? And the second question is, are you thinking about killing yourself now? Now here's the thing. So many people think that that's such a scary, scary question to ask. But if that is going on inside a young person's head and they've never been asked that question and never been able to put the words to it, sometimes it's actually a relief to get those words out. And then a parent's job in that space, depending on what the answer is to help them find help. If the answer is yes, I've thought about dying, and yes, I'm thinking about dying right now, then you need to stay with them and help them find help until they are in safe hands and until they've got care that can guide them through that. If their answer is, yes, I've thought about it, but no, I'm not really thinking about it right now, then you need to help them to find help. It's just slightly less urgent, but you need to think about how you can keep them safe in that period. Is everyone tracking with me here? This is a really heavy thing to talk about, and yet we talk about suicide and we talk about depression all the time, and yet the two most important questions to ask seem to be off the table for most people, and they are really, really important questions. If not for your young person, for your young person's friends, you might be the person that actually asks them in an empathetic enough way that they're able to say, yeah, I have, and no one's asked me. Yeah? Now, be prepared for a couple of things. If you ask someone that question and they say yes, yes, then be prepared to sit with them until you actually can get them the help that they need. First thing. Second thing, be prepared for them to be really angry. If you've got to a point where you don't really want to be alive anymore and then someone starts trying to get you help, you're not usually stoked about it. Normally there's a whole lot of frustration, and especially if you're a parent, there are a lot of emotions that kick around in the midst of this. A lot of emotions like, how dare you think about doing that? Don't you realize how selfish that is? Don't you realize what that would do to our family? And I get what those emotions would be like, but that is not the place for them. The time and the place for them is somewhere else with someone else who can help you process that. In that time and in that space, your job is to help them. A thing to keep in mind, a thing I'd love you to remember, is most people who think about suicide actually don't want to die. Usually, they just want the emotional pain to stop, and they can't think of any other way to make it stop. That's what happens when you get desperate. No one said this stuff was fun. No one said it was easy. It can be incredibly hard to understand, especially if you haven't experienced it yourself. And so to try and land this plane so we get to go home and watch whatever is on TV, I want to talk about some of the reasons, some of the common sort of causes for depression. Now, there are varied scientific theories about the causes of depression. The kind of jury is still out on that because depression is quite complex and academic people don't like to say anything empirically, like we've worked it out, this is what causes depression. But from my own experience of living through this and from the thousands of young people that I've worked with over the last decade, I'd say that these are some of the common ones. So one is chemical imbalance, which is literally your body doesn't make enough serotonin or dopamine. And so that's a really interesting one because young people look at their life and there's like, I don't really have anything to be sad about. I don't really have anything to be depressed about, and yet I feel the full experience of this chemical imbalance. Sometimes it's loneliness. And depression can actually breed more loneliness because you find yourself going, I'm going through this and no one else understands what it's like to go through this, therefore I'm in this on my own. And so it can start out if I don't really have any friends or I don't belong anywhere, and it can actually snowball to the fact where it's like, no one knows what it's like to be me, and that's a really horrible feeling as a human being. Sometimes it's feeling stuck or trapped, like you've got no options, or the home situation that someone's living in is really tough, or people get stuck in relationships, or they're 13 years into school and they're like, this is just going to go on forever. Sometimes it's pointlessness. This is really common on the other side of the amygdala shutting down for a wee while. So there's concrete thinking for young kids, and then the amygdala turns off, the pruning process happens, and then there's abstract thought on the other side of it, which is awesome. But one of the things that abstract thought does is it asks questions like this. So what's the point of life? And our society actually doesn't really offer a whole lot of really awesome things to build your life on. This is my opinion, so take it or leave it. But a lot of young people look at their 13 years of schooling and go, hang on, so, whoa, wait up. Is the point of life to go to school, to do well so you can get a good job, so you can buy a house, so you can hook up with someone, so you can make some kids, so you can send them to school, so that they can get a good job, so that they can buy a house, so they can have some kids, so they can send them to school, so they look at life, it's called existential crisis, and they go, this whole thing's pointless. Sometimes it's guilt or shame. Sometimes something that's happened to them or something they've done to someone else feels so bad and they don't know how to process those emotions, and so they end up just carrying it with them everywhere they go. And the last one is hopelessness, which is when yesterday was horrible, today is horrible, and it feels like tomorrow is going to be horrible as well, and it's never going to get better. The kind of uplifting thing about talking about some of the causes is you get to talk about some of the things that can actually help. So if people are chemically imbalanced, what do they need to be chemically balanced? There are some good drugs that can do that. That's why a great first port of call for young people with mental health issues can be the GP. Sometimes that's a great place to start. Some antidepressants are really good at balancing out chemical imbalance. Some aren't. There's a whole lot of different thought around that, but that's what you need. Loneliness, what do you need? You need a place to belong to. You need to know that you matter. You need to know that other people understand what you're going through. And this is a real high-risk one, in my opinion, for depression, because a lot of depressed people or young people struggling with mental health issues find other young people who are struggling with mental health issues and go, you get it? Cool. But then what happens is sometimes it actually spirals and they kind of feed into each other's depression, which is why I love things like youth group and I love things like sports teams, because it makes young people have relationship with other people who aren't experiencing this, but they belong to something. And often they actually belong to something where other people notice not just what's not going well for them, but what's going well for them and name it and encourage them, which is awesome. Feeling stuck or trapped, what do young people need? Normally they need options. Normally they need another perspective. Sometimes going and talking to a careers advisor can instill a young person with a whole lot of hope that they didn't have, because they realize they don't have to become an accountant like their dad. Accountants are boring. Pointlessness. What do you need? You need a point. You need purpose. You need something to give your life meaning. Now, people find this in all sorts of different places. For me, a really significant part of my own journey towards healing was faith, because in faith for me, I found a whole sense of purpose and a whole sense of hope of how tomorrow actually could be better than yesterday. You don't have to find a purpose or hope in faith, but you do have to find a purpose and hope. The last one is guilt or shame. Normally you need someone to help you work out how to either forgive someone else or how to forgive yourself. Faith's also quite good at that, but you don't have to be part of faith to go through that process. There are lots of ways to do it. As a parent, you can work out how you can help your young people to meet these needs, but one of the most significant things, in fact, one of the biggest protective factors for a young person is the kind of environment that you provide at home. But just before I sort of finish and wrap up this talk with a few ideas on how you can provide an environment which is nurturing and caring that young people can belong to, which is the biggest protective factor, here's what I wish that every single young person knew. And maybe this could become a mantra in your family, something that you say over and over again. What I wish that every single young person in New Zealand knew is that it's totally okay to struggle. It's just not okay to struggle alone. We at Attitude spend our entire job spreading that message, but we'd love that message to be reinforced for young people from every different perspective. So, if you do find yourself worried about your young person, and you're trying to work out if it's okay, or if they're okay, or you're trying to work out what to do, one of the biggest things that people worry is, well, how do I get them help, or what sort of help do I need to get them? And in developing this talk, I spent a lot of time consulting with professionals and the DHB and stuff, and there's this one concept that I came across again and again and again, and this is what they say within the mental health profession, and it's this: any door is the right door. Any doorway into heading towards help is the right door. If you start and the intervention is actually way too intense for the actual issue that the young person is dealing with, you found out that it's not actually as bad as you thought it was, and then they'll help you find the help that that young person needs. If you jump in really high, like a high need sort of intervention, and you find out that's what they need, stoked. If you start out really low, and then they realize that they have much higher needs, then they can get sent in the right direction. Literally any door is the right door, because any door is better than no door, yeah? In terms of seeking help. The other thing to keep in mind is no conversation is wasted. If If you're going to have a conversation with your GP and they don't really help you, the conversation was helpful, it worked out that that didn't help. And then you can go and have another conversation. Our brains are like cars. If you took your car along to a mechanic and you said, hey, can you fix my car? And the mechanic went, oh, no, it's a bit hard. You wouldn't be like, oh, okay, and go and push your car in the sea. You would take your car to another mechanic and be like, the last guy said he couldn't fix it. I hope you're not as crap as he is. It's the same thing with seeking help. You seek help until you find help that helps, because weirdly, help actually helps. Yeah? Any door is the right door. But the most key protective factor, knowing that help helps, the most helpful thing that you can do as a parent is provide a home environment which is nurturing, secure, that young people can belong to. And just 4 really quick ideas on what that looks like. And these are challenges if you're dealing with a young person who is experiencing mental health issues. First one, have fun. They're probably not going to find you that funny if they're feeling really depressed. But don't stop having fun. Fun is the glue that holds families together, which means keep doing your dumb puns. They won't laugh at them now. 20 years down the track, they'll be repeating them. It's one of the only inevitable things in life, repeating your dad's dumb jokes. So don't stop having fun. Dance, even if you can't. One of the things I've found out, and I know this works with young kids, but it turns out it works with my nephew who's 16, is sometimes if I try and talk to him with a normal voice, he won't listen. Put on a stupid voice. He thinks I'm dumb, but he responds to me. Be silly, have fun, sing stupid songs, do dumb voices, dance like you're a crab. I don't know what it is, but put effort into having fun, because fun is the glue that holds families together, especially through difficult times. So go home tonight, get every single cup out of your cup cupboard, go and put them all over the front lawn, wake up in the morning, open the curtains, go, hey kids, it's muggy outside. Seriously, that is the stuff that matters. Speaking of outside, get outside. One of the best things for us physically, mentally, emotionally, socially, spiritually is being outside. We have so much technology that makes it way too easy to stay inside. You wake up in the morning, you look out the curtains, you're like, oh, there's a cloud. Guess we'll watch Netflix. It's just so easy. Get outside. Maybe one of the best investments you could make as a family is to buy everyone in your family a good jacket. It blows my mind the amount of money that people spend on technology. Spend some money on good jackets. One of my favorite life quotes is, there's no such thing as bad weather, there's only the wrong clothing. When it's pissing down with rain, go to the beach. 2 reasons. 1, there's no one else there, because who goes to the beach when it's raining? And 2, it's amazing and it's beautiful, and getting outside stills your soul the same way that climbing up the Port Hills does. So do it. Number 3, check your posture. My point here is, what is your posture towards your kids? What is your posture towards a young person who's struggling with this stuff? Because you have a posture towards them and they know what it is. My question is, do you know what it is? Do they sense that you're a little bit annoyed, that you're a little bit over it, that you're a little bit frustrated, that you're a little bit over them? Because young people pick up on that, and then it's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. They do more of the thing. They do more of the signal that you're sending them. And the way to change your posture, it's not actually up to your kid to start behaving, and then you go, cool, now I'm enjoying you. It's up for you to change your posture so that your kid knows that you still enjoy them. And the simple way to do it is actually to give compliments. I've had to learn this with my daughter because she's really similar to me, and so she annoys me hard out. So we have these really big arguments, and in the middle of them I'll pause and say, Eliza, I just love how determined you are. It changes my posture. So the first one is giving them a compliment. The second one is actually writing a compliment down. That will change your posture really quickly, especially if you then sneakily put it somewhere, like their lunchbox. You know they're going to get it later in the day. They'll come home in a different space. And the third, and this is the most powerful way to change your posture and have an impact on them, is say stuff that you love and value about your kids to someone else in front of your kids so they can hear you. That does something. In fact, I've done research on this. Apparently, it's 4 times more powerful hearing someone that you respect say something nice about you to someone else. That's a way to change your posture, especially when things are difficult. And last one, and this is apparently one of the biggest protective factors of all, is eating together. And again, this is a thing that technology has made increasingly rare. We're so busy and we're so stressed that even when we do get a chance to eat together, so often there's technology hanging out around the table. Prioritizing actual connection with your whānau around a table, it does something amazing for the mental health of everyone in the family. So prioritize it at least 2 or 3 times a week. I know it's not easy, but it's worth it. I've said so many things tonight. If you're sitting here and you're like, I need help, or if you're ever worried that you will, here is a great list of people that you can get in touch with. There's another list here. GPs are actually really helpful. If they're not, go to a different one. Youthline are incredibly helpful. They're 24/7. You can call them, you can text them for free. The Lowdown has got mood tests that you can take to try and work out where you're tracking or where your young person is tracking with mental health stuff. Coaches 1737 are a free counselling service that you can get in touch with. You can text them on 1737. AnxietyBC.com is just a great website around anxiety. Suicide Crisis Helpline is a helpline if you've got a suicide crisis. That's what that is. Crisis mental health care. So this here is the DHB's number that you call if you're like, I'm in way over my head here and I don't know what to do. There's been so much stuff in the media about our mental health system being stretched, and it is. But if you've got an emergency, you will get responded to, and that's the number to call. If nothing else, 111. I know if you find yourself in some really high pressure situation, you might not know what else to do. 111 is always an option. So if you want to, grab a photo of that now. There's a take home you can have as well. But I just want to shout out to the organisation that I work for, the Parenting Place. We create a whole lot of articles and resources about all of the tricky topics of navigating the teen years. You can find them on our website under the How to Talk About section. There's how to talk about porn, how to talk about sex, how to talk about depression, how to talk about grief. And it just encourages us to talk about the things that we find it difficult to talk about. I hope that this hasn't been too difficult for you tonight. I understand that this is confronting. I understand that some of the stuff I've said might have even been triggering for people here. But I hope you can leave feeling inspired, feeling encouraged, feeling a little bit more informed, and I hope you laughed at least one of my dumb jokes. It has been a privilege. I really, really value people who value this conversation. So thank you. Let me finish following the same tikanga of the way I started. Let me just karakia whakamutu to end. Kia tau, kia tātou katoa. Te ata whai o tō tātou are ki a ihu karaiti me te aroha o te atua me te whiwhi ngā tahitanga ki te wairua tapu. Ake, ake, ake. Āmene.